Hi, this is Craig Stocks, and this is my photo critique of the day. This is our opportunity to look at images and think critically about what we like and what we think maybe could be an opportunity for improvement. And there's really no requirement other than that you approach it with an open mind, because you'll always learn something whenever you learn what someone else thinks. Even if you learn that you think they're wrong and you disagree, just the opportunity to think critically about it is a good opportunity. Today's image comes to us from Wilson Wood. So Wilson, thank you for sharing this image. This appears to be a sunrise, although again it could be a sunset, but the colors and the tones and everything in this image just gives me that feeling of sunrise. We've got beautiful oranges and blues and purples going on, which is reminiscent not only of sunlight but also very consistent with the cold feeling of the ice and snow that we see on the dock here in the foreground, and in the ice forming on the lake, and it looks like snow accumulating in the background. A lot of beautiful filaments in these low clouds in the foreground, and then this wonderful sky behind it, behind the trees. It really creates a wonderful feeling, and just almost makes you cold looking at it. I like the way the docks in the foreground kind of lead us into the image, and in fact kind of point into the sunrise portion of the most colorful portion. So overall, I think it's very successfully conveys that feeling. Thinking about some of the things that maybe could be improved in the image, in a perfect world, of course, it would be nice if we didn't have the power lines in the background. They kind of take us out of that setting of being out in the country and remind us that man has his thumbprint all over. The other thing that I find a little bit distracting are the vertical posts on the second dock here. Those would be something that would be relatively easy to take out in Photoshop if you're approaching it as a fine art image, and you may or may not feel that it's okay to make those kinds of changes, and that's a personal choice that each person makes. One thing that you might consider would be cropping the image. The sunset or sunrise is kind of in the center, and it would be a little bit more powerful if it was to one side. And with the power lines over here and a lot of the open space in the ice, if we crop it a little bit so that we take out those power lines, we accomplish a couple different things. We can move the most colorful part of the image off center, which gives it a little bit more position of prominence or power. We also avoid some of this dead space, and we can virtually eliminate the impact of those power lines. So that might be something to consider as you're looking at this image. The other thing I want to talk about again is the overall brightness of the image. That if we look at the histogram, and that's the reason I have it open in Lightroom, if we look at the histogram is just showing the distribution of how many tone values in the image are pure black or darks or midtones or bright, and then we eventually get to pure white over on the right hand side. And of course the height of the histogram tells us how many tones have that level, and we can see the majority of our tones are in this lower mid-tone shadow region, and virtually nothing brighter than around a 70 or 75%. And as you move the cursor over the image, you can read out the values here. And again, we see there's just almost nothing brighter than 60 or even 70%. Even though there's a lot of color, that overall it's just not very bright. And to put that in perspective, if we look at a simple grayscale, I'm sure have seen grayscales like this before that go from pure black to pure white and show all of the steps in between. And in this case I have 11 steps so that the center is just a medium gray at 50% luminosity. When we take a photo, we're taking all of these wonderful details and translating them into differences in brightness. And the only way to see a detail is to have a difference in brightness or a difference in color from one pixel to the next. If the two pixels are side by side in the same color, then we don't see any detail. So as we translate the world, which has a huge range of brightness values, far brighter than we can capture with a camera, and try to represent them as an image on a computer screen or on a piece of paper, we have a very limited range to work with. That if you look at this in terms of stops, there's only about a 7 or 8 stop difference from pure black to pure white on either a computer monitor or on a printed piece of paper. So we have very limited range to work with, and if we don't use these brightest tones, in effect we truncate this grayscale, we have even fewer tones available to work with, and that means there are going to be fewer opportunities to show detail and nuance in things like those clouds. If we look at this again against a white background, we can see immediately that this takes on kind of a muddy look, where if we look at the full grayscale against the white background, we can see that we're using all of the tones. So if I go back now to the image we were looking at, against a white background, it kind of reinforces that there really aren't any bright tones here. And if we just, in this case in Lightroom, if we just slide the white slider up, what that's going to do is brighten the bright areas and pull those bright areas to the right in the histogram and start to use more of the full range that's available to us. And we do start to get a little bit bright and maybe lose a little bit of detail here in the clouds, and I can adjust that by pulling back on the highlights. Now the highlights are the things that are bright but not real bright, and the whites are the things that are really the brightest. And by pulling this back down, what we're doing is keeping all that wonderful filamentary detail in the clouds, but we're letting the brightest areas get a little bit brighter, and that gives the image a little bit more pop and snap. I wouldn't necessarily say that every image should have pure black in it, or should every image have pure white, but anytime you choose to truncate the options that are available to you from pure black to pure white, you should have a thought out artistic reason for doing it, that it could be a scene that is just flat by nature, for instance a foggy scene. A scene like this, normally we want to have more of a range of blacks to whites. So that's, I guess, if there's a message here, it's to be cautious about not using the full range of values that are available to us. But overall, I think Wilson has done a really good job with this image. Let me reset it back to what he had. I think the image does a great job of capturing that cold feeling of a winter morning on a lake, and the ice and the snow and the colors all very successfully convey that feeling. So I think you accomplished that goal very nicely. Wilson, thank you for submitting your image. I really appreciate it. I can't do this without images to look at. So if you'd like to have your image reviewed, just send it to me in a Facebook message and I'd be happy to spend some time with it. If you have any other comments or different opinions about this, just drop them in the comments. Thanks and have a great day.